Testing. Okay. Okay. All right. Getting a little sound coming, going through, going through, going through. Okay. All right, people. Give me a second. All right. Hi. It's been a while. So, I've been trying to get a hang of this whole streamy thing for a couple years. Yeah, I'm a bit of a slow learner at that, right? But um, I've got some ideas for what we're gonna do here, what the project for this channel is going to be, and I'm hoping to get a little better at my communication style. So, I want to just start off by talking a bit about what we're gonna be doing on this channel, if I can remember. Okay, so plans for the channel. First thing, been playing a lot of chess. Been beating my sister a lot at chess. To be to be clear, been so I'm like, maybe I'm gonna do some chess games, right? Improve my chess game. So maybe I'll stream some of that. So we'll be doing a little chess just for fun because I need to decompress by feeling bad about how good I am actually at that fucking game. Um, okay. Is my sound too loud? I would never know. All right. So that's going to be one thing. The other thing is, it turns out that the sense making web, the meaning making web, whatever they're calling the liminal web, this the little corner of the internet. I've been hanging out there for a few years, and they seem to have grown enough to have some channels that are critiquing it, and I think that's just great sign of maturity, right? And I myself have been growing and working on developing my own critiques and defenses for that particular area. I think there's good and there's bad, and all of the good and the bad comes from the trappings of just humanness, and so maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. So chess, interacting with the so-called liminal web, uh, probably some fluff topics to help spearhead growth on the channel, because I'm trying to get a bag, if you know what I'm saying. I'm trying to make a little money. I'm trying to. I doubt that I will, but let me put positive vibes into the universe and manifest my reality, and maybe or figure out how to exploit the more realistically figure out how to exploit the YouTube algorithm for my financial benefit. Yeah, so some of that. So chess, liminal web stuff, junk food topics. I want to start debating because I'm angry, and I want to act out my anger by winning debates, and lots of luck, right? But I mean, that's not the whole of it. I want to focus on some specific topics that I'm strong in, but I don't just want to win. Fundamentally, what I'm about and by extension, hopefully, what I want this channel to be about is actual growth, like being like growth as a person, being able to grow as a person. Now, some people are critical of the liminal web space because they use a lot of jargon, and I was watching this dude, Digital Gnosis, and I value some of his critiques. Um, he uses a term developed by Daniel Dennett called a deepity, and I'd actually like to talk about deepities. But the thing is, to just throw that around is it's basically, it could be a thought terminating cliche. So this guy was like, and maybe I'll cover his video today, but he was talking about how the liminal web people basically hawk a lot of bullshit, and that we ought not take bad ideas seriously. And I think that there's something to contend with there, because I think we ought to take bad ideas seriously to the extent that we can understand that they're bad ideas, and not just determine that they're bad ideas and here's why. Because there's a difference between an idea that is hard to understand and an idea that is just bad, and they can be hard to disambiguate. Um, so, terminology. But in addition to that, I would like to cover his stuff because he's small and I want to exploit his audience for my own personal financial gain, right? I think I could catch up to him, but who knows, right? Who knows? Um, I wanna explore some terminology, right? So there's some critiques of John Vervaeke, and if you look at some of my other stuff on this channel, you'll see like I like Vervaeke's stuff, and there are specific reasons why I like John Vervaeke's stuff. And I think if you don't live a specific life, it can be hard to understand why his stuff is valuable. Uh, because he addresses specific problems for specific people who've lived a very specific life. Um, if I can generalize from my own experience, it's like white people, maybe generally middle class ish, who've struggled existentially, probably because they had too much time on their hands. Um, and had some flirtations with woo type stuff, but then were disillusioned, and but also knows that was value in those spaces, but they haven't quite put a finger on what that value was. So I am one of these people. Okay, I'm not. Um, I don't have it all figured out, but I grew up on the internet. Okay, I grew up uh, through um, all the weird mid 2000s meme stuff like E-Bombs World, and through like pre manosphere stuff in the seduction community, through like I dated a girl who a young woman who was a super into the what do you call it, uh, the humanist, like early atheist movement. Like I've gone through the whole gamut, right? And I've also had my own experiences with woo stuff. So there is some value there. The problem is separating the wheat from the chaff. So I'd like to do a little bit of that about that, right? Um, Logic. I'm interested in the idea of what logic is good for, because I was a baby philosopher. I'm a baby philosopher. I did like probably what amounts to one semester of philosophy coursework. And then I've run out of money and I can't support that endeavor anymore. But I really value the process of developing my own thoughts and rigorously thinking, and this is part of what this channel is about, is developing my capacity for rigorously thinking. What is the value of that, right? I want to talk about how logic, using the tools of logic to develop one's reason into how one acts in the world. And I think if you're just critiquing the liminal web stuff on the basis of that they just sit around and talk all the time and they're not really doing anything and they're making things deeper than they need to be, I think there's some validity there. I think that at the same time, people have different struggles. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting there to be something more than there is. I think there's a lot of people who want to reduce reality to some form of physicalism, like some form of naive physicalism, because they want to. They've been tricked into a fantasy world, and I relate to that. I think it's very easy to get caught in as it's easy to get caught into rabbit holes of systems of thought that oversimplify things or overgeneralize things or make things easier than they are, or that are unnuanced or present themselves as nuanced while enforcing some, like below consciousness systems of social pressure that are played out by how our tribal instincts and theories of superiority over other people. I think there's a lot of room for bullshit in whatever sphere you exist in. So I think that's important to acknowledge. And so this digital gnosis guy, like, I agree with some of that critique, but I also think it's a little simple because of his own aspiration of not wanting to take bad ideas seriously. So I guess that's a disagreement on process, right? I think we ought to take bad ideas very seriously, including and especially our own bad ideas. And in order to do that, we have to be willing to examine the ideas we hold most dear. So I've had to do that and reevaluate for myself. So we will be covering some of that. So yeah, logic. I'll probably do some content about logic. I'm not an expert by any means. It's something I want to get better at, and what better way to get better at something than to teach it? So I'm probably going to do some videos about logic. And I think there, at least, in the very least, there'll be some value there for me, right? So, cool, logic. Other thing, I'm particularly interested in Buddhist logics. I used to be a big Buddhist. I've been doing a lot of therapy lately, and I'm discovering that a lot of the techniques used in therapy are basically jacked wholesale or piecemeal from Buddhism, and that's a little frustrating for me because because the way that things like mindfulness are presented are as therapeutic techniques, and yes, sure, that's true, but then what isn't spoken to is the sort of underlying framework from which these practices were developed, and the idea that some of these practices have logical or they have progressions in skill development, which are largely ignored from what I can tell in therapeutic settings, which is, I guess, fine, but at the same time, without acknowledging the roots of where these things come from, to me, it feels a little disingenuous. So, how did I get onto this thread? Basically, to tie it back, I'm interested in Buddhist logics and Buddhism in general. Do I consider myself a Buddhist at this point? Probably not. Buddhism is was very helpful for me at a time in my life. I think what one thing Buddhism is really good at is making lists of ways to think about reality. It does tie one into a certain way of, the ontological commitments, as some people say. And to that extent, I'm not really sure how to speak to that. I understand I've also only been exposed to very certain kinds of Buddhism given my Western context. So, so, so logic, Buddhist logics, we're trying to talk about like how does one actually live a good life, right? And some people, I think, don't think that that's the question to ask. Like, it's a misarticulation of the problem of living. And personally, I think that that's wrong. Do I have good reasons for thinking that's wrong? Well, I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking to explore. Maybe it is wrong. Maybe the thing is that whole conversation implies a lot. There's a lot of things that we have to disentangle about what we consider good, what we consider right, what it means to live a good life. And as a baby philosopher, I have danced with these ideas a little bit. I don't think I have many of the answers, but there are a few things that have worked and some things that haven't, and a lot of them, sort of follow the guidelines of modern therapy, but also I think there's extensions that modern therapy is inadequate for. So, yeah, how to live a good life. And given that part of this channel is about how to live a good life, what that means is I think these streams are going to be generally shorter, probably 2 hours ish, but it depends. I mean, I am looking to make a little money and to pursue this as a potential business, and I don't think I'm covering topics that are very lucrative, so I may digress into more lucrative subject matter in order to make a little more dough to support myself. So we'll probably be doing a little bit of that. So chess, logic, living a good life, talking about the liminal meaning making, sense making web, critiquing and validating, logic, Buddhist logic. I also have here virtue ethics. I said I wanted to do some debates. One topic I want to debate is virtue ethics. Now, my tentative position is that virtue ethics is a good standpoint from which to draw one's ethical foundation from, not because it is the most internally consistent, but because in a lot of ways it is the most act-outable. When you look at things like utilitarianism and deontology, the sort of practices that you're able to work through, the thing is those things aren't really developmental. That is, they don't grow with the person. They're kind of perspectives that are like, well, we have to figure out what the rules are and then follow the rules. And that broadly applies to both. Like with deontology, the rules always matter, and there's a rule in utilitarianism, which is like do what's the greatest good and what has the most utility, and you sort of go from there. But that's not really you can choose that perspective, and I think those are valuable. But if we think about things in terms of like, okay, where are we as a person, in terms of like what traits and skills do we have, how would we like to develop, what do we aspire to be, what does it mean to be a good person, and then how can I develop those qualities, which has to be constantly an ongoing wrestling match with yourself and how you are. I think even if you're a utilitarian or a deontic, you have to do these things as well, because you have to engage with your system and your ability to adhere to it. One, we could say one is virtuous to the extent that one is behaving consistently with one's the things that one believes, and to the extent that one is behaving antithetical to what one says one believes, one is either a hypocrite or one is just not meeting their own standard, right? So, and if you want to meet your own standard, then you have to put in the work to actually try and meet your own standard. So, I would consider that to be a type of virtue ethics. So, I think in some ways, virtue ethics sort of subsumes everything else. But of course, I'm speaking very broadly off the cuff. I haven't dug into the SEP, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which I'm sure the people who end up watching this channel are going to be familiar with, but maybe some other people will watch it as well. Okay. That was a ramble, right? So, what are we doing today? Well, given that I plan to stream more consistently, this is more just like a beta test. I don't have things really well planned out other than what I've talked about so far. So, what are we going to do? Do I need to explain myself? How much ought I explain myself? I think it helps for me to explain my relationship to the liminal web. So, what do I mean by the liminal web? The liminal web, the meaning-making web, the little corner of the internet, is a pocket of Jordan Peterson adjacent, you could say, communities that valued what Peterson had to say about meaning and sort of grew up trying to resolve certain issues of meaning. They call it the meaning crisis, and this stuff comes from John Vervaeke's work. You can watch Awakening from the Meaning Crisis on his stuff. And it provides a lot of the foundation. That is, Vervaeke's work provides a lot of the foundation, though it pulls liberally from Peterson's work as well, which if I'm being honest, I went through a binge of Peterson's stuff around 2017. It sounded really nice. I haven't really retained much of it. It sounds nice. Like, if you listen to some of his lectures, like, it's, it sounds reasonable, and then you forget whatever the fuck he's talking about. So there's that piece. Honestly, I didn't know that Vervaeke and Peterson were in part of the same university at first. I discovered Vervaeke's stuff, I think, randomly on YouTube. I don't even remember. I think I saw some videos about, like, the thing he said about chi, the TED Talk about neuroenlightenment, and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is like answering some of my questions. And then shortly after discovering, he started Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, so I got to get a good fix. And I followed that right along through to the end as it was coming out. So, in a lot of ways, I consider Vervaeke's stuff to be, it has been foundational for my own aspirations in life. Oh man, what was my point? Okay, I was talking about the liminal web, right? So the liminal web is this pocket that sort of Peterson adjacent stuff, and it's pretty like they flirt with it, but they don't really like some of his political takes or all of his political takes. It tries to be apolitical. They think they have to move beyond politics, and in general, I probably agree with that to a degree. So, what is that? So, sort of an explanation. So, there's all these people who sort of deal with all of this different work, and they sort of play with it. Some people have looked at Jonathan Pageau Jonathan Pageau's stuff, and it become, Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Christians. There's a fair amount of Christians in it. There's some other people. It's fairly center politically, I would say. There's some people who lean more conservative and some people who lean more leftward. But I think in general, people are trying to be apolitical, but I think it can be kind of hard to not pay credence to one's political affiliations. So they just sort of talk and dance around it rather than being explicit. And, maybe that's valid, maybe it's not. I'm not sure. There's a lot I'm not sure about. But I have been living in that world. I've been looking at some of the stuff, and really my aspiration has been getting to the point where I feel like I have the faculties to critique it and to not reject it wholesale, but to contend with some of the issues in developing my own capacity to contend with some of the issues. I think in summary, some of Vervaeke's language is useful in summarizing my own perspective on what it's doing. That is what the liminal web is doing, which he talks about the language of explaining versus the language of practice or training, and the language of explaining. So language of training is basically the idea is that what you use to help facilitate behavior in someone, the kinds of language which typically rely on metaphors to sort of help people grasp things intuitively, is not the language that clearly articulates real explanation for the phenomenon that are actually going on, and you run into problems when you mix the two up. For one, a language of explanation is not necessarily the best to get the most out of people's behavior, and the language of training isn't the best to really explain the phenomenon that's really going on. So being able to make this distinction helps us to get rid of some of the confusion. And okay, so in summary, what I mean by why I went on that little rant is the liminal web is trying its best to live in a space that is self-aware enough to make this disambiguation. And the tricky thing is with any system of thought, you could say, how one relates to that system affects how one thinks and talks about it. I think humans have a tendency to identify with systems of thought, and what they do then, and I'm saying this is something I'm putting forth, I don't really have evidence of it, but I can speak to my own experience, is when you find some answers to some of the questions you've been looking for in a particular system of thought, whether it be the red pill people, whether it be the sense-making web, whether it's atheism, new atheism, feminism, philosophy, theology, if you find answers to some of your questions, and speaking for myself, there can be a temptation to want to identify with the thing and learn the answers to the problems within that thing, like learn the answers to the frequently asked questions, and then adopt those frequently asked questions and develop a system by which anyone who comes to challenge you on your thought, you have all the answers sort of adopted from an identity perspective, and you can sort of tango, you can do battle with people based on these just having adopted these answers to these frequently asked questions, because you're like, I'm an X now, therefore I'm going to adopt all of these views and sort of work with talk to people and just keep trying to find the answers to the questions that I'm confronted with by other perspectives, so that I then know how to contend with them. And eventually you develop this whole system and web of reasons to counteract other people's reasons of objecting with your worldview, and you reach worldview enlightenment when you can finally fend off attacks from any direction about this perspective that you've now adopted as the truth, and no one can change your mind. And this way of relating to things is something I'm fairly against, and I'm against it because I have fallen victim to it. And I've fallen victim to it because it makes me feel good to feel superior to other people. And I think a lot of people feel this way until you run into the problems in life that smack you in the face, and you have to seriously reevaluate your life. There's no real reason to challenge your own beliefs, and you can keep on believing your little believies until you die. I think that's what a lot of people do. And that's not what this channel's about. That's not what I'm about. So then what's the alternative, right? Well, the alternative is learning to think for yourself, and that's a very vulnerable and scary thing to do. If you intend to actually walk the talk. And that's sort of where I'm at. And is this the best way? I don't know. I don't know if this is the best way, but it's what I'm working with. Okay, so with that in mind, I kind of want to look at this Digital Gnosis' video, because I guess you could call it, say that I want to give it a critique, but it's not really a critique that I am trying to do. It is, in fact, well, it is a critique. I do want to make a critique because there's some things I agree with, some things I don't, and as someone who wants to critique this space, I'd like to separate the wheat from the chaff. So sort of like the reason I put forward before about the issue with how one adopts new perspectives, right? And the challenge of just wanting to like identify with the thing because you found the answer and you finally found it, and the life finally is coherent to you and it makes sense, right? Like part of the I lost my train of thought. Part of the value of that, part of the problem with that is the problem of challenging your perspective. So this guy, Digital Gnosis, I mean, he's got his critiques, and he seems like he's been burned by different thoughts, right? And I would like to look at his critique of his critique, and for his response to Paul VanderKlay. And so just to start, what is my relationship with Paul VanderKlay? Not really anything. I've occasionally put in his stuff in the background. I remember listening to his debate with Vaush. I think that's fine. He's fine. I like that he talks about Vervaeke's stuff. I'm not a Christian. I find some of his stuff useful. I find some of it not. I mean, what he does is he broadly gestures at things that I'm interested in, and that's entertaining enough for me on occasion. I like that he broadly gestures at Vervaeke's work and the other people's stuff. I don't think because he's in a political position as a pastor, he has to dance around things. He can't have strong conclusions. I mean, there's some things he has strong conclusions about, and he says as such, but a lot of things, he just sort of has to dance around because he has to accommodate everybody because that's literally his job. He doesn't really have the liberty to take strong opinions and assert them forcefully. And so I go into that knowing that, not really expecting that. His style is meandering and wandering, and I have somewhat of a similar style, I think. But yeah, so I kind of want to look at this video by Digital Gnosis, and we can critique the critique of the critique. And maybe I'll send this over to this young man, and maybe he and I can battle it out. Okay, how do I want to bring this up? Right. I see. Okay. Is this sound gonna come through? It just occurred to me that the sound might not come through. Let's see. Ta 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 ta. Okay. Okay, that sound is not gonna come through. It's annoying. Listen, don't judge me, people. Video capture device. Just cancel. Can I do? Thank you for bearing with me, people. This is going to be kind of annoying, but I'm still figuring all of this out. Oh, gotta love it. Good lord. What is showing up here? Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah, skipping. Oh my lord. That's very loud for me. Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. Okay, I think we figured it out.
In his older lectures as this kind of mysterious man who then has become a kind of public figure in his own right by having his own YouTube channel and encouraging people to become Eastern Orthodox and so forth. So anyway, I have various critiques.
Yeah, so he's talking about Jordan Peterson there, I guess. And he's talking about Jordan Peterson talking about Jonathan Pageau, right? So, cool. All right, we're just moving into it.
Views, which I've talked about for a long time. I mean, one of them was, I remember I used to get triggered by this term parabolic knowledge that was getting thrown around. I think that one's gone out of fashion now. But more recently, egregores, which they were introducing. And I did a WoW video where I raised several sort of philosophical objections to egregores. And I think there's a few sort of things that go on with my critiques of that community and what they tend to do. One of the critiques is going to be just that I think that the philosophies themselves that they put forward are generally internally inconsistent. The second critique is that I think that of the available ways of explaining the canonical of their theories important to explain, their theories tend to be sort of some of the worst on the market. So there's already existing views a lot of the time that can explain, what ideas are, how does language work, the problem of the one and the many, and often these existing, often the kind of beliefs I'm referring to are ones that Christian philosophers themselves, Christian theologians, or at least ones that I consider seriously, will themselves believe, or lots of the church fathers who are Platonists of various stripes. I would recommend that Christians hold to, if they're going to be concerned with philosophical theology, that they sort of hold to those sorts of positions rather than the thought that came to my mind was like garbled nonsense, but that's a load of wave. Other than the positions described by people like top-down, bottom-up emanations and all this. So that's one thing. And then I have these criticisms where I think which broadly fall out.
Okay, so I would like to have a more detailed understanding of his critique of the top-down, bottom-up emanation piece. Because there's probably plenty of garbled nonsense that I would disagree with in this space, or that I would agree is garbled nonsense in this space. The top-down, bottom-up emanation piece, I think, is I guess it depends on in what way you are trying to critique that idea. I think that idea can be a useful one, he said hesitatingly. Okay, so in what way is it useful? Okay, so what do I think of when I think of top down, bottom up emanation, right? So a long time ago, I had this book called Zen Guitar. I'm a guitarist. Got some guitars over my shoulder, right? I had this book called Zen Guitar, and in that book, they talk about zooming in and zooming out. Right? This is a principle used in Stoicism or other things, where you sort of try and get like a top down view of your experience, and so it's a kind of perspective taking from above, a view from above. That's the Stoic exercise, and this can be helpful in terms of like getting perspective on your life, kind of literally, right? So like um, sometimes it can be helpful to focus on the details, and sometimes it can be helpful to focus on the bigger picture, right? The forest and the trees, right? It can be useful depending on what you're doing to look at either one. And if you're feeling stuck, you may be focusing on one more than the other, or not focusing enough on one or the other. So um, this I think is useful. I understand that top down, bottom up emanation can also be used in the context of, I guess, broader statements about the nature of reality and how things are existing. And I know Vervaeke really likes Neoplatonism, and I've done some reading into it, and it's largely beyond me. I don't think that's necessarily. I think this gentleman here thinks that those kinds of ideas are not worth their salt because they tend to be kind of abstract and weird, and they depend on certain ontological commitments or whatever. And maybe that's true. I don't know. Uh, I'm not. I wish I could say with certainty that he was right in that respect, but I can't. So, but what I can respect is the feeling that, well, if what one means when one says top down, bottom up emanation, uh, you're referring to those broader ontological philosophical commitments, and that you're asserting that that is the way that the universe runs or whatever, like I would understand not wanting to you know cash in your chips on that idea. Like yeah, it's interesting to think about. It can be interesting to like play around with these kind of broader systems that may seem incomprehensible. Is it largely going to affect your life in that respect, though? The bottom up and the top down emanation, is that really going to affect your life? Probably not. And should one bother with it? I think it depends. I really think it depends. So I'm not really ready to throw it out, but I understand not wanting to commit to it or even to throw it out wholesale.
Of my meta philosophy as well. So these are criticisms that I have of philosophy in general, which is kind of like philosophy is about explaining various phenomena that we all agree to. So, for example, there is discourse about what's good and bad, right? And we might say, well, what are we really talking about when we have that sort of discourse? And are we talking about actual facts that we disagree about? Are we expressing true fact propositions and those sorts of things? And then then you have these kind of philosophical divides in meta ethics around moral realism versus moral anti-realism or whatever. Now, something that I dislike in ordinary philosophy is when say someone's a moral anti-realist, which means that they don't think that there are mind-independent moral facts. Well, then the moral realist replies to them, well, you can't say anymore in ordinary discourse, murdering babies is wrong or something. And that's just incorrect, isn't it? Because both theories explain our ordinary moral discourse, where both people will say things ordinarily, like murdering babies is wrong. The point is, what's the philosophical theory? And nothing hangs either way off the back of the philosophical theory. And then trying to kind of bring that philosophical theory down into the ordinary ways things stand, I sort of detest that. And anyway, that's what I see a lot of happening in the kind of Vandeclay type communities, where people are being, again, indoctrinated, that's the word, term, socialized, introduced to these ways of thinking about things that rely on etymological stories about the origins of words, equivocations on meanings, and things like that. And then they're being encouraged in just ordinary discourse to kind of play word association, tell a story about what's going on. So it's like...
So that's an interesting critique, and I'm sure that this does happen. I think it's interesting that he draws attention to a critique about equivocation, because I've actually been meaning to one thing I wanted to talk about on this channel is equivocation. So give me a second, because I might as well do this bit. I had a whole thing that I planned to talk about equivocation. So the thing is, so equivocation is a fallacy that I actually, I don't know if I first learned about it, but it was definitely one that is emphasized by Vervaeke, and I would put it that this gentleman may have found out about this or emphasized this particular fallacy in his own mind from that stuff. My understanding is he sort of is sort of a monster from these communities. He sort of talks about it. That's what this video is about, right? Like he's a product that is now critiquing this community, and I mean, you know, all for it. I appreciate a desire to critique one's own foundation. I think that's important, right? So, but yes, equivocation was first really emphasized for me, enough for me to pay attention to it, by Vervaeke's work, and to really appreciate the damage it can do. So let's or at least the confusion it can cause, right? So I want to talk about it. I've got the SEP dictionary of entry on fallacies, and we're going to just give me a second. Okay, so there's 10 matches. I want to see if I can pull it up. Pop this puppy to the top. Right. Equivocation. The fallacy of equivocation. The fallacy of equivocation is an argument which exploits the ambiguity of a term or phrase which has occurred at least twice in an argument, such that on the first occurrence it has one meaning, and on the second, another meaning. A familiar example is, the end of life is death. Happiness is the end of life, so death is happiness. The end of life first means ceasing to live, then it means purpose. That the same set of words is used twice conceals the fact that the two distinct meanings undermine the continuity of the reasoning, resulting in a non sequitur. The fallacy of amphiboly, I think I pronounced that wrong, but we'll see, is like the fallacy of equivocation, a fallacy of ambiguity. Right, fallacies of ambiguity. They're important to be aware of. So let's read what else they have to say about equivocation. The fallacies dependent on language are equivocation, amphiboly, combination of words, division of words, accent, and form of expression. Of these, the first two have survived pretty much as Aristotle thought of them. Equivocation results from the exploitation of a term's ambiguity, and amphiboly comes about through indefinite grammatical structure. The one has to do with semantical ambiguity and the other with syntactical ambiguity. However, the way that Aristotle thought about combinations and division fallacies differs significantly from modern treatment, so that's fine. Let's see. This is the result that the new wide category of informal fallacies is a mixed bag. Some of them are at bottom logical failures, equivocation, composition, ad misericordiam. Okay, so that's another thing they'd say. Um, okay, so got some new approaches to fallacies, doubts about fallacies. This is probably worth a read. Maybe we'll go over it in more detail in the future, but as it stands, I think that there is value in understanding it as an error, understanding equivocation. So I think we do get confused when we use language ambiguously, and we're not really aware that we're using language ambiguously because we're kind of creating metaphors in our mind about one meaning versus the other. Once again, this is speculation on my part, so I don't have a firm foundation to fully speak in detail about this, but I'm speculating that this may be the case, that the ambiguity creates our, we get confused by our own metaphorical thinking, the connections that we're making, and we're asserting something as if it were the same thing, even though it is two different things in the meaning of the sentence that we are saying. So I have no doubt that in a space on the internet so filled with jargon as this liminal web, I would expect there to be a fair amount of equivocation. But I think any a community that speaks to emphasizing these kinds of things ought to be able to critique this aspect of themselves and take it in good faith, and to pay very careful attention, and to reasonably, if one does not feel one is equivocating, to reasonably articulate the reasons that their sentences are not equivocation. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? I'm not used to speaking this much, so we're gonna learn as we go. Okay. So let's see what else this guy has to say.
I don't know. I'm gonna meet my friends. All of a sudden becomes I'm gonna commune with my friends, right? Which becomes communion in a religious sense. Whatever you direct your attention towards is a form of worship, you know. And and you start playing word association with these theories, which are then being brought to bear in all these ordinary states of affairs where they just don't belong whatsoever. And if you're going to tell people who disagree with your theory that that's what they're really doing, right? And so, like, as soon as they say, like, I'm going to meet my friends, you're like, there you go, you're religious or something. Well, then you're just question begging. You're not actually, because they presumably, the people who disagree, do not agree with you, right? The people implicit in the fact that they disagree is that they don't agree with you about your theoretical interpretation of what's going on there. And then the other one would be, I think that some of these views are harmful. I think that they actually, a lot of the time, prop up harmful or hateful prejudices that people might have. So, for example, towards trans people, recently I had a very frustrating conversation with Rational Carpenter about a comment that Jonathan Peugeot made about a similarity between, there was art in the late Roman Empire of hermaphrodites, right? And I made the claim that the analogy that he's trying to draw is between trans people existing, or trans people being in our culture, there being trans people in our culture today, and hermaphrodite art, right? And then so he's saying these two things are analogous in the two times. And then the other part of the analogy that I think was working is that late Rome, right? So it's the end of the empire comes next. And I think what the argument sort of goes, or what's being implied, is that in today's culture, after there being trans people, the end of our civilization then is what comes next or something. And this according to me is just a completely wrong way of assessing what's going on. I mean, what were the amounts and distributions of like hermaphrodite art, right, in the early Roman Empire? But the other thing is that this is clearly an argument, right, that's being used to bolster a prejudice against trans people, and to deny that, I think, is just to just retreat. No, just making the simple fact that trans people are a sign of the end of things or something is just using these sort of silly philosophies to justify random prejudices people have. And I know that these are the prejudices people have because oftentimes these views are very attractive towards conservative religious folks. So anyway, I've made these criticisms of Paul van der Klay and people in that community, and Paul has responded sort of to me. So I'm just going to briefly review that. And also my new Wi-Fi might arrive at some point, so I might have to pause it for a second while I go and get that. But here we go.
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to boast about them. جاءكم أهل اليمن. The people of Yemen has come. They're soft-hearted. They have the wisdom. They have the yaqeen. They have the knowledge.
Hi, this is Paul. I wanted to do a little video responding to comments. Now, some of these comments have been, some of these types of comments have been around ever since I started on the YouTube channel. You can find them on Twitter. They rise and fall. I think they're just part of the process and part of the conversation. Lately, a little bit more on, let's say, this little corner. The title I gave for that little video that I released before.
I sort of object to this framing of this little corner of the internet as well, because this is why I've gone with the thumbnail that I made, just because, and I could be wrong in my interpretation here, but it seems that implicit in that is some kind of self-victimization, right? Like, oh, come on, we're just trying to have a nice time in this little corner, and big nasty Nathan with his left brain thinking is coming along and criticizing us. And this is how a lot of Vander Clay's fans do view me, right? They just think I'm too autistic to be communicated with, and that all of my
So I could be wrong about this, and this is me sort of putting my foot into a situation that isn't really my business. But this feels a little like this gentleman is taking it a little, I don't want to say too personally. That's invalidating. I don't want to invalidate him. No bad blood. But I think this feels a little speculative about the problems that exist. Now, maybe the problems exist, maybe they don't. I don't know. So maybe I should keep my name out his mouth. Keep his name out my mouth. But I don't know. Feels a little like I didn't get that impression from listening to this. That he was trying to underplay the. But then again, there is a part later in this video where whether he means to or not, Mr. Vander Clay does come off a little passive aggressive about the situation. But I just sort of had a thought that maybe this video feels a little too petty to start with. This isn't really the kind of vibe I'm trying to have here. And maybe I'm going to deal with fallout from this, or maybe I won't. This is kind of like... my channel's pretty fucking small. So, I'm not super concerned. I probably should have thought this out more. But you know what? We'll watch a little bit more and see where we get to.
criticisms just stem from like being a retard, and that's why I in fact can't see the truth of the top-down bottom-up emanation. Whereas I think that my criticisms actually stem from the reasons that I've provided, rather than being autistic or something, for the view that I hold. And this, and I often hear this kind of, well, can't you just kind of leave us be, right? And well, no, when I think that these views are propping up harmful behaviours and things, I want people to actually question them and come to adopt what I view as more helpful beliefs about the world.
I can jump into commentary on the Peterson, Peugeot, and Vervaeke conversation. Most important Jordan Peterson video since the biblical series. Well, fair enough. To back that up. Now, obviously not. That's my.
Hold on.
What I view is more helpful. These views, and this, and I often hear this kind of, well, can't you just kind of leave us be, right? And well, no, when I think that these views are propping up harmful behaviours and things, I want people to actually question them and come to adopt what I view as more helpful beliefs about the world.
Okay, so it sounds like what he means by harmful behaviors is he's pointing to how by giving credence to some of these ideas, we are inadvertently giving credence to other ideas. He gave the example of how these ideas are propping up transphobic narratives about the end of the world. He was talking about Peugeot and hermaphroditic art and how that was indicative of the end of the world or something. And I agree that that's ridiculous. If that's the claim being made, then that's ridiculous. And if what is happening here is that we are propping up, these ideas are propping up that kind of behavior, then I could understand the critique. I think it's possible for someone to make both correct claims and incorrect claims in the same breath. And I don't think that when one does that, one's incorrect claims make the correct claims invalid. So that's the tricky piece, though, and this is often how this goes, right, where people will say a bunch of things, some of which are right and some of which are wrong, and because people can point to the correct things, that makes other people think, well, maybe the incorrect things are somehow also true, and that's where things get tricky, right? And we have to, put on our thinking caps and actually do the hard work of disambiguating. Um, so if the claim here is these people are harmful because they smuggle in, they are acting as a Trojan horse for bad ideas amidst all the gobbledygooks and what are later deemed deepities, and we'll talk about deepities as well. Uh, I think that's I think that's a little paranoid. I think what's more likely, is um, that people just have a mishmash of ideas and prejudices. Like he says, people have prejudices, and they just, they just spout stuff and they grasp at straws for like to justify their prejudice. I fundamentally agree that with that idea that people justify their prejudices and they'll use whatever means to justify their prejudices. It's much harder to confront one's prejudices, especially if one feels that one's prejudices are justified and then one finds new language with which to justify one's prejudices. But that being said, you would have to buy the premise that everything else that's being said is just deepity gobbledygook used to smuggle in these prejudices into uh, into the minds of people who maybe are vulnerable or whatever, which I think is what he's claiming here, and part of what's motivating his critique. And I appreciate, I can appreciate that stance. I have a similar stance in frustrations around people like the medical medium, and various hucksters and such, but I also feel like there's enough room in my mind to hold space for depths of knowing about the world and the universe, whatever the fuck that means, that I don't currently grasp. That doesn't mean that everything that addresses that concern is therefore valid or consistent or real or true or however you want to word it, speaking of equivocation. But it does mean that I will very tentatively look into the realm of the mystical and say what is valuable here and what is not. It is very tempting to play the infinite skeptic. It is very tempting to doubt everything or doubt things pragmatically to the extent because it's very easy to be skeptical. And it feels good to be skeptical because then you put the burden of, you basically are able to shirk responsibility for putting forward your own ideas and to focus on the other person's ideas and your critique of them. And there is a place for that. But being skeptical of one's own views is a lot harder. And especially if one has been harmed and is now in a space where one is, I'm speaking more about myself now than the gentleman in the video. I can't speak to his experience. I'll speak to my own. I know the temptation of wanting to react against the things that the box that I was previously put in, or that I put myself in, because now I see it a little more clearly. I see its faults. I see its fault lines. So yeah, we'll go with that for the moment.
Commentary on the Peterson, Peugeot, and Vervaeke conversation, the most important Jordan Peterson video since the biblical series. Well, fair enough to back that up. Now, obviously not. That's my opinion. It's funny that I sometimes feel I have to say that as if it isn't blatantly obvious that it's my opinion. Who else's opinion would it be on my channel? And that sort of brings me to, again, the Peterson Ian McGilchrist conversation, where the literal internet is something that's really hilarious, because it's just sort of a dynamic that takes hold of the internet. If you pull back and look at context, you'd say, well, Paul Vanderklay thinks that conversation with Jordan and Jonathan and John is important. I noted on Twitter the other day, my sister, who has a
So I actually criticised this comment though, and Paul disagreed with me, and I think there's an inconsistency in his thinking here, because he said this conversation is important, right? And I said, well, it's not important because it's not going to change any people's views, and the vast majority of people are going to go on as they do. And he disagreed with that. Now, the retreat here, I think, is to say, well, it's just I think it's important, but I agree that most people don't think that it's important. But it seemed like the claim that was being made about it being important was that it actually has import for far more people than just Paul. It's not like him just saying I like pistachio ice cream or something, like I like Jordan Peterson. He was saying, no, this actually is important. Like it's relevant to lots of other people. And I don't think he can believe it. I don't think he can believe at the same time, right, that it's important in the sense that it has import for lots of people, and that it's just his subjective opinion, and doesn't, like, as if it doesn't have this import for other people, and people are fine to just think that it's useless information. And
Okay, I'm gonna do my best to put into words what I'm hearing here. It seems like what this guy is saying is that Vander Clay is simultaneously saying that this stuff has import for people, like the information about the meaning crisis, the conversations that are being had are important for people, while also saying, while trying to hide away from the critique that this stuff is important. Okay, let me try again. Okay, so Digital Gnosis is arguing that this stuff that's being spouted on this kind of corner of the internet is important. He's saying it's not important. It is not important. It is, if anything, a distraction. It does not provide any actual value to people's lives. And Vander Clay is saying, well, it is important. He's saying, well, but it's just his opinion that it's important. I don't think that that's what Vander Clay is getting at, though. Let me read it through again, because I'm still trying to put my finger on it. Give me a second. We are going to go back.
like a little hobby that some people might have. It can't go fine to just, and that it's just his subjective, his import that just bought it. But that it's not going to criticize
that kind of Ian McGilchrist conversation, where the literal internet is something that's really hilarious, because it's just sort of a dynamic that takes hold of the internet. And you pull back and look at context. You say, well, Paul Vander Clay thinks that conversation with Jordan and Jonathan and John is important. I noted on Twitter the other day, my sister who has a chick.
So I actually criticized this comment though, and Paul disagreed with me, and I think there's an inconsistency in his thinking here, because he said, this conversation is important, right? And I said, well, it's not important because it's not going to change any people's views, and the vast majority of people are going to go on as they do. And he disagreed with that. Now, the retreat here, I think, is to say, well, it's just I think it's important, but I agree that most people.
Okay, so what we are going to do right now is pull up our handy dandy little notepad. Boop. Okay. So he said, there is an inconsistency in Paul's thinking. And back again.
I don't think that it's important, but they're not going to change. I think this conversation is important, right?
Paul. This conversation is important. I think his name is Nathan. No, it isn't.
And I said, well, it's not important because it's not going to change any people's views.
It's not going to change any people's views.
So the vast majority of people are going to go on.
The vast majority of people are going to go on.
As they do. And he
as they do.
agreed with that. Now, the retreat here, I think.
Paul disagrees.
is to say, well, it's just I think it's important, but I agree that most people.
Now, so now Nathan is claiming that Nathan is claiming that Paul is retreating. Treating? That looks wrong, but I don't know if it is. Nathan is claiming that Paul is retreating to. So basically, he's saying that Paul is saying, well, it's just my opinion. It's just my opinion that this conversation is important. You know, is this not showing up on the screen? Damn it.
People don't think that it's important. But it seemed like the claim that was being made about it being important was that it actually has import for far more people than just Paul. It's not like him just saying, I like pistachio ice cream or something, like I like Jordan Peterson. He was saying, no, this actually is important, like it's relevant to lots of other people. And I don't think he can believe it. I don't think he can believe at the same time, right, that it's important in the sense that it has import for lots of people, and that it's just his subjective opinion, and doesn't, like, you know, as if it doesn't have this import for other people, and people are fine to just think that it's useless information, and you know, like a little hobby that some people might have. It can't be both at the same time, you know?
Yeah, I don't think that that's what's being said, but I haven't put my finger on the thing that actually is being said. And maybe that is what's being said. In which case, I would agree with the Nathan gentleman here, if that is what's being said. But I guess I would have to. We'll have to examine why Paul is saying this is just his opinion. I think maybe what Paul is doing is saying he feels that this is important for everybody, but he isn't sure. It's just one guy's opinion. He may be saying something like, you don't have to believe what I'm saying. I think it's important. You don't. So let's agree to disagree. That's a common thing. I don't know if that's necessarily a retreat to want to say let's agree to disagree. I think that's more of a, if people have two differing sides on an issue, a way to just wash your hands of determining who's right. Which maybe that's a retreat and maybe it's not. I'm not 100% on that. But I don't know. But maybe I can get some more context and we can flesh this out a bit more.
Channel where she talks about decorating. That's a very different channel than mine. My sister has absolutely zero interest in this conversation with Jordan, Jonathan, and John. The vast majority of the world, Jordan Peterson may have 5 million plus YouTube subscribers, but regularly, if you bump into a person on the street, you say Jordan Peterson, they're not going to know who he is. I mean, it's an awfully little corner of the world here, this little corner of the internet, and
and in my big nasty corner, we go around with our sticks beating up on little kids.
It's interesting and important we have our tempests in teacups. Now, this isn't anything new. I'm a pastor in the Christian Reformed Church. I'm used to tempests in teacups. Recently on CRC Voices.
Yeah, here I think Nathan's trying to imply that Paul is playing the victim. And maybe that's the case, but I that's not the impression that I'm getting. But I have my own blind spots when it comes to this kind of behavior. So maybe he is just trying to play the victim. I don't know. That's not the impression I'm getting, though.
Pete from Edmonton wrote a little posting when he was talking to someone who was recalling this split in the Dutch Reformed Church in the Netherlands in 1944 under the German occupation over presumptive regeneration. And people were sort of aghast at, with everything going on in terms of the Nazi occupation, the thing that you're going to focus on, oh little church, is this theological controversy? And the answer is yes. This is what people do. Now, I want to respond to some of these types of comments. I wanted to do it in a video because I generally speaking have a rule of myself on Twitter. I don't do back and forth because it's pointless on Twitter. You know, all this angst.
I sort of get this, and I think it's fair enough, right?
The drama on Twitter just reveals to me people's inability to look at what Ian McGilchrist would say, right-brain contextual apprehension.
But I disagree with this neurobollocks shit. I hate it. Hate it. When people just learn a little bit of neuroscience or something, and then that is now a weapon for just explaining away whatever anyone who disagrees with them. That, you know, if you're disagreeing with me, it's just because you've not managed to use your right brain enough to apprehend the context of the situation.
I generally agree with this critique. I don't know if that's exactly what Paul was doing in this situation, but it definitely had that flavor to it, where it's like, so this a little corner of the internet has a kind of culture to it, right? And so there's like some common set of thinkers, you could say, in this space, and so there's a cultural awareness of certain ideas without a lot of understanding. Like it's hard to parse theory. Theory is hard to deal with. So to actually parse the theory and to wrestle with it and figure out whether you think it's true or not is it's challenging, and most people don't want to do it. It requires too many metabolic resources for people to want to contend with it. Thinking is hard, right? So what's easier to do is to say, yeah, I mean, it's probably true, and we'll just accept it wholesale. Everybody does this. Everybody does this. It's not just the people who try to sign on to the neurobiological stuff. I mean, like, New Age people will sign on to poorly understood quantum mechanics stuff. I mean, like, skeptics will rely on arguments from science that they don't really understand, like, but they'll make the argument that they've heard by rote and present it as if it's their own argument. Like, this is a common thing. I see it as part of a common problem. I get what he's saying about being annoyed by this. It's a common problem in a lot of communities. I think, I don't really know what one ought to do about this. It's very easy to be enculturated into something. So, but yeah, these are the kind of arguments where it's like, my recommendation would be something like, are you sure you understand what you're saying? Maybe go back and read it and really decide for yourself. But when you have the competing feeling of wanting to fit in and to use the language and to, when in Rome, do like the Romans and use a lot of the same language to dress yourself up as part of the team, and it is desirable to say these kinds of things because you get validated by the community, because people are like, oh, I recognize that. That's what Ian McGilchrist said. Oh, let's accept it wholesale. And like, that's not entirely what makes up, like, there's not entirely groupthink in these communities. There are people who challenge things, and that's good. But this is a very I agree with Nathan. This is a very shallow use of McGilchrist's work, which admittedly I have not read in detail, but it doesn't sound like this. Feels like a logical jump to me, the way that Paul is using this.
Situations. How the hell have you made that assessment in this particular case? You're not justified in thinking that's what's actually happening. It's just a stereotyping device.
Twitter is a little space on the internet where you can write a selected number of characters, and there it is. So this very thing's quite as ephemeral as a tweet. So I don't do back and forth on Twitter, and I usually scan or read the comment section. I can't say that I catch all the comments. It very much depends on how much time I have in any given day to sort of peruse comments and read them. The comments are comments, and I very much appreciate them. And actually, I learn a lot from the comments. But even though, let's say, Mark Lefebvre writes extremely needy comments, and he does.
Needy, yeah, but they're full of bollocks. Like, Mark is an idiot.
And his comments are very worth reading because he really goes into depth on the comments. The comment section is just a difficult place.
The same guy who lied about like being this like tech whiz in the 70s and all this stuff. Like, his story is so full of bollocks and plot holes, right? He's such a strange person that's clearly fabricating this narrative about who they are, right? And this is just the type of person that flourishes in this sort of deepity little corner of the internet where people are looking for gurus and people who are going to make things more complicated.
There it is. Deepities. Let's talk about deepities. And let's talk about thought-terminating cliches. Okay? Deepities. I wonder if there's anything in the SEP about a deepity. Right. Okay. I think it's worth going through some of this. Probably, you'll probably be familiar with this idea, but I think it's worth just reading through just to talk about it. All right, can we see it? We can see it. Okay. So this is an article written by Oliver Burkeman. I have no idea who that is, but it's in 2013. It looks like this was written. So we're talking still very much skeptic world on the internet. The new atheists are still, they're just on their descent, right? So here we have this column. This column will change your life about deepities, and we'll just read through and see if this is any good. So it says, the other day I met a young boy in the desert leading a goat by a string, and we got talking about the best-selling New Age author Paulo Coelho. This didn't happen in reality, I ought to stress, but as Coelho would surely agree, the imaginary is also real. My problem, I explained, is that reading Coelho's cryptic pronouncement, the wise are wise only because they love, there are no ends, only means, leaves my brain feeling like weak old trifle. It's not that they're wrong exactly, they sound as if they might be right. It's that I can't get any purchase on them to begin with. What Goatboy might have replied, if I weren't making this up, is that I should get hold of the new book by the philosopher Daniel Dennett, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking, because Dennett, though he doesn't mention Coelho, identifies the problem precisely. Many of these dreamy observations are what Dennett refers to in a brilliant coinage as deepities. So to be clear, before I go on, He's not the person who coined the term, he merely just redefined it. The original term, deepity, was founded by, this is according to the Wikipedia page. Give me a second. Give me a second. Darn it. Okay. Deepity. There it is. So, redefined the term, originally coined by Miriam Weizenbaum. So, Miriam Weizenbaum coined the term. They don't explain what the original coinage of the term was, but as Dennett used it, and to move back to it, it says, many of these dreamy observations are what Dennett refers to in a brilliant coinage as deepities. A deepity isn't just any old pseudo-profound bit of drivel, it's a specific kind of statement in which one can be read in two different ways. So here we're getting back to equivocation, right? One way that's true but trivial, and another that's much more intriguing but false. The example Dennett quotes is, love is just a word. On the level of linguistics, of course, it is, but that hardly tells us much. On another level, it's pretty manifestly untrue. It sounds deep only because it teeters precariously between those two readings, exuding the whiff of paradox. Once you've encountered the concept of deepities, you can't help seeing them everywhere. Que sera, sera, beauty is only skin deep. The power of intention can transform your life. Inevitably, because Dennett is one of the four horsemen of atheism, the deepity idea has been dragooned into the increasingly tedious fight between the so-called new atheists and those who take the Bible literally. Dennett a bit snidely accuses Rowan Williams of talking in deepities when he describes his faith as a silent waiting on the truth, whereas I'd say he's trying to describe the ineffable, possibly a foolish enterprise, but not a deepity per se. But the rest of us who have no dog in that fight shouldn't let the term be monopolized. It is far too useful. Deepities are so prevalent in popular psychology and adjacent fields, presumably because of the enormous appeal of counterintuitive insights and advice. Before you say it, yes, this column loves the counterintuitive too. One example, I enjoyed Adam Grant's widely publicized new book, Give and Take, on how being limitlessly generous to others constitutes, to quote a subtitle, a revolutionary approach to success. But that subtitular claim strikes me as a partial deepity. If you define success in a short-term convention, strictly materialistic way, I'm not sure it's true. If you redefine success, it's probably true, but not so surprising. Yet much of the best advice just isn't revolutionary or surprising. The best way to eat healthy is to consume a lot of vegetables and not much processed stuff. The best way for most people to invest in the stock market is index funds. If you feel sad a lot of the time, you should consider seeing a therapist. These truths aren't especially deep, and they're certainly not deepities, but they are truths. Listen to your soul, as Coelho might say, and you'll hear it whispering in agreement. All right. So, fair enough, right? That's the wrong one. That one? Fair enough. I agree that there are a lot of deepities in this space, and at the same time, as this particular author points out, it's important to be able to discern what's a deepity and what is pointing at the ineffable. Now, it is possible that those in this space would claim that, of course, everything that is considered a deepity here is probably that they're just trying, they would take refuge in the idea that they're pointing to the ineffable instead, and that what they're saying is indeed profound, you know, the power of now and all that, but in different words, right? The over-complexifying of the ineffable. I don't know if that is really a leg to stand on. Then again, it can be hard to discern a deipity from someone who is gesturing at the ineffable. And maybe it's the case that people who use deipities are using them because it's the only tool they have to gesture at the ineffable. And maybe they are experiencing something ineffable in what they're saying. But it may be true that the semantic value of the words that they use is just insufficient to communicate what it is they're intending. So what really ends up happening is they end up communicating nothing but a kind of vague feeling of I don't know, positive, toxic positive spirituality. That seems possible. I would need to go through a list of things that sound like deipities and try to assess them one by one. And maybe that's something worth doing. Maybe we can take a look at some of these things, because it could be the case that a lot of what is being said, especially, particularly by Peterson, but potentially a fair amount by Vervaeke as well, that a fair amount of it is deepity nonsense. And we would have to take a look at it to see. And maybe I'll do that at some point. I don't know how much I want to really get into this on this channel. Probably a little bit here and there. The truth is, doing this for a long time would probably get pretty boring. So, but for today, I mean, we can keep sort of playing with this and see what comes of it. I can already feel myself starting to drag, but let's take a look.
And less clear and sounds like they're saying something profound and like they figured it all out. He's a kind of predatory person in that environment.
For me to interact with people in a really determined way. So when I, just, I don't know, looking around, it's like, maybe it's good to make a little video about responding to a few points. And, maybe I can have some more substantive conversations with some of these individuals later on. I know this summer I haven't been doing randos conversations just because my travel schedule, because my travel schedule is so demanding, that means that all of my work is compressed into these few little weeks. And that means that, can't do randos conversations. But after September, things should hopefully slow down and we'll have more time for more conversations. So Nate has been getting more and more visible. Nate, who was banned twice from the Bridges of Being Discord server. It's one thing to get banned by Joey. A lot of people have been banned by Joey, but Nate had the distinction of getting banned by Job.
So I'm honestly not sure that this is true, that I did get banned by Job. I'm certain that I got banned by Joey.
No, don't skip me. I'm on a mission to tell you VisionWorks makes it simple to change your mind about your glasses for up to 100 days.
Definitely skipping.
But from my history on the Discord, so Joey's here saying, haha, he's alright, just not total fit for this chat. I imagine he'll keep chatting with Paul Van in future directly. So Joey, this was because some people were expressing my comment, though I do useful with my, hope he...
Don't care about the drama.
Of me. He disagreed parabolic. This is Unifil, then such a... right, maybe there's a ban log or something that's going to show that it was him who banned me, but I honestly just don't think it was. I just think that's wrong. And I think that this... Nathan's a bad guy, which is why even
Job that upset. You must have really done something. And so Nate has been on again, off again.
I must have really done something. I just don't think that's true. So this should be removed from the story of what happened.
How can I say it? Rather, Nate's had a rather chaotic 5 years on the internet, and I mean, I was first introduced to him when he had a very heartwarming video as a, he's a young.
I'm not saying I was probably a bit of a dick, right? And I might have banned myself if I behaved the way I did. I'm not questioning that it wasn't justified. I'm just questioning the after the fact rationalization.
And the cake isn't baked if you're only 22 or 23 years old. So cut him some slack. But he had a very lovely video that he posted on a channel about how he became a Christian because of Jordan Peterson, and then he went to a church and they had a falling out with his church, and then he wasn't a Christian, and he was kind of a Christian, and I don't even know his status right now in terms of the Christian thing, but he spends time paying attention a lot to apologetics and philosophy. And before he was studying coding, he was working in software engineering or something like that, doing computer coding, and now he's a philosophy student. And a lot of times his comments on Twitter and in the comment section, and he makes full-blown videos, has these long conversations and live streams on his channel. Most of his comments seem to boil down to, you're not doing it right, which is...
So I have never said you're not doing it right. My criticisms are to do, I have very specific criticisms, and it's sort of telling to me that none of them can be articulated, and they're to do with the internal coherence of the view that's being put forward, the jargon being used, and its usefulness, where I think it's actually used to mask to do the pseudo...
Internal coherence. I would need to know more about... I would need to hear more of an elaboration of what he means by internal coherence, because I feel like most worldviews aren't internally coherent. I mean, they can be up to a degree, so maybe what he's saying is that insufficiently coherent. sufficient meaning, like there ought to be some amount of coherence within a perspective, and that certain amount from his perspective is not being met by this worldview. Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. A lot of the stuff going on in this space does feel a little bit fluffy, and when you start to incorporate things like egregores, which I don't really understand, like, to me, it's kind of like if you accept the idea of a hyperobject, the Vervaeke points to the work of, I forget the guy whose work he points to, but if you accept that such a thing like hyperobject, like, I think he points to examples like climate change, and oh, I forget the other one. But I mean, if you're going to say that these things are such thing as a hyperobject, and hyperobject here is providing some utility in terms of describing types of things that are big and seem to have a coherence of their own in terms of like an overarching patterns. It seems to me that egregores are just superimposing a menacing kind of what do you call it? There's a word I'm looking for. There's a specific word. Anthropomorphize. So you're basically anthropomorphizing the hyperobject. You're granting it more human-like characteristics, or maybe animal-like characteristics to these things that are largely conceptual things produced by human meaning making, to use some jargon. I mean, I think there's something to be said there. Can these things be menacing? I'm not sure. I mean, that's with my very limited understanding of what even the fucking egregore is. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at.
Profound deepity type thing. And also how the view being put forward by Pajot, Vervaeke, and Van der Klee here actually compares to other competing explanations of the phenomena that it purports to explain. And I think it does a much worse job, whilst maximizing our ontological commitments, right? So I think it explains less and requires, all sorts of implausible entities and things.
So he's saying it explains explains less and yet proposes all kinds of entities, the implausible entities, right? It explains less and implies all kinds of implausible entities. I think that's fair, I was watching a video, I think it was, I always forget his name, and this may betray some of my commitments, but I already said I was Buddhist, so I'm kind of stuck with that. What's his name? Daniel Ingram. Yeah, Daniel Ingram, Buddhist guy. I think I was watching a video with him. He was talking about, he was talking to a guy, and the guy was saying that there are two types of people in life. There's splitters and lumpers. There's two types of, I guess, academics or whatever. And to me, I see a connection there between that and differential and integral calculus, or analysis and synthesis. Like there tends to be a tendency in human thinking to either split things apart and look for differences, and then try to find ways of putting things together. And it's sort of yes but and yes and, Now, to the degree that applies as broadly as I'm saying, I mean, this may be like a pattern in my own thinking about lumping. I think this is something that one ought to incorporate both of these ways of thinking into one's own thinking, and this may be betraying my own tendency towards lumping, but I think Vervaeke's probably a lumper, which is why he's come up with his grand narrative about what's going on in terms of the meaning crisis, and it's a kind of pattern matching, a statistical pattern matching, which probably, like, the data points aren't necessarily wrong. Maybe they're just avoiding other data points. The thing that I think is valuable here, though, is this is, I think, still a space that at least if it follows it what it purports to believe, then it ought to be self-critical enough to be able to examine to the degree that it may be bullshitting itself. And I think, you know, the fact that bullshit is put forward in the first place, I mean, I think it's an important thing to factor in, right? Like, are we behaving consistently with at least the fundamentals of, like, are we, to what degree is this stuff bullshit? Is it deepities? Are we actually able to apply our thinking to critique? And once again, I think my main criticism here is just the idea of, like, it's very comfortable to fall into a criticizing role, and I think that that's valuable. But I guess what I'm saying is I maybe I need to watch more of this guy's content to see what what explanations he feels are better, and whether those are really contradictory, and, you know, really maybe try to frame the sense-making web in a way that, like, we have to consider, is it the kind of thing that can be contradicted? Because if it can't be contradicted, then is it really saying anything? Or is it just vaguely gesturing at things and essentially ignoring responsibility for what it's saying? I know probably more than a lot of people the joys and safety that comes about from speaking vaguely and broadly and not really saying much of anything, while seeming like one is saying a lot of things. So I think it's important to consider this seriously, especially given the tendency for people in this space to sort of gesture vaguely at things.
To exist.
But you know what? I'm actually kind of tired. I think I'm going to call it a day. Where are we at? 2:23:23? It seems lucky. I'm going to stop, but I think this was solid for today. Solid amount of stuff to talk about. I can feel myself, like, losing my mind and sort of fading. So I'm going to stop. And I don't know, maybe I'll chop this up later, but into more bite-sized chunks. But I think this wasn't so bad today. I look forward to doing some, like, chess type content. I look forward to exploring more logic and talking things out. And the primary goal of this channel is, yeah, I want to make money, but it's also to help get my thoughts more thought out. To be clear, like, I know my thoughts aren't the most coherent, and I'm not claiming to have any answers whatsoever. I obviously don't. But given some of the stuff I watch on YouTube, and I watch an unhealthy amount of YouTube content, there's some people that are just garbage, and I know that the bar is pretty low. So I strive in my life to be just above average, and that's what we're aiming for. We're trying to at least put some effort into our thinking, and maybe more than what other people are capable of. He said, gesturing vaguely at some people that exist. Anyway, but like I say, I'm fading. I'm tired. I'm getting off. But yeah, thanks for tuning in or whatever, and see you next time.